It can be hard to trust change as it is happening. It's that in-between time of no longer and not yet, and for many years I have heard encouraging descriptions of the caterpillar to butterfly metamorphosis. Change and transformation are not only possible, the experience is magical and beautiful. Just look at that butterfly. Let go of what was, embrace who you are meant to be, who you are becoming. But as anyone who has experienced being a teenager can tell you, becoming yourself is not easy. As anyone who has transitioned their gender can share, if you are respectful enough to stop and listen, transformation is not a simple process of just flipping a switch. More recently, I've been reading about how in the chrysalis, the caterpillar does not just sprout pretty wings. It must completely dissolve itself down into goo before reforming into a butterfly. This goo phase, the chrysalis space, is what I'm talking about this morning. The goo phase in which you're no longer a caterpillar, but you're certainly not yet a butterfly. And it's hard to trust change as it is happening. Paul Tillich was a 20th century existentialist theologian that I studied a significant amount while I was in seminary and beyond. His theology takes psychology seriously, for example, so I find his work helpful when talking about topics like growth and transformation. Tillich writes this about the relationship between growth and chaos. Nothing that grows is without form. The form makes a thing what it is. Every new form is made possible only by breaking through the limits of the old form. In other words, there is a moment of chaos between the old and the new form, a moment of no longer form and not yet form. Here's the fascinating thing. For the caterpillar, it's obvious when they are in this time of transformation. For people, it can be harder to spot. When you or I or someone you know is in that goo phase, there's no cocoon or chrysalis. We don't have a silky pouch or a hard shell around us as we go into goo phase. Instead, it looks like this. We're waking up in the morning, we're brushing our teeth, we're checking our email, we're going to work or school, or whatever it is that different people do during otherwise normal days. The chrysalis space, for us, looks a lot like a normal day to someone else. There may be some outward signs in some cases, some clues might appear, but not necessarily. One clue is this: when I was in the goo phase for my identity as a young adult, there was a lot of chaos around me. Chaos is a clue for when a person is in chrysalis space, in the goo phase. Often I hear, and in my experience this holds true, is that the struggle is worth it. The goo phase is a time of uncertainty, of chaos, of disorientation, but it's worth it. The chaos is present during small changes and when we undergo large changes, transformation. Right? The chaos scales larger as well. The transformation available in the chrysalis space, though, is worth it. In her book, Trusting Change, my UU colleague Karen Herring talks about how we can find our way through personal and global transformation. The first step, she says, is finding the courage to start. To illustrate this, she tells the story of going down into her unfinished basement when she was a child. The single light bulb from the ceiling in the middle of the room had only one way to turn it on. It was by pulling on the string, dangling from it, at least 8 feet away from the door. I had to move fully into the darkness to reach it, reluctantly letting go of the door jamb as I did. Feet stepping cautiously, arm flailing, sweeping the shadows to find that light's string. This is the feeling I often get when embarking on any creative project. Usually these conversations are about personal transformation. We talk about personal growth and the creative process. And I don't want to make every sermon about the current political situation, but let me offer just a short bit of how the same dynamic we experience on a personal level can also happen on a macro scale. In recent years, I've heard some of my radical progressive friends proclaim that the whole political show is corrupt. Not just the left or the right, the red or the blue, everything. These friends advocate tearing the whole system down and starting fresh. And while I understand that concept, and to an extent agree with it in theory, I don't trust it in practice. Because it feels a little bit like the current administration is attempting to do exactly that. They are not moving the deck chairs. They are making dramatic changes with far-reaching and long-lasting consequences to fundamental aspects of our political system. Politically, we are in, or at least approaching, a goo phase. It can be hard to trust change as it is happening. But I'm not sure it is a good idea to trust these changes. What is the basis for my assessment? Am I just playing politics and supporting my team, or is there something about these changes that is prompting me to be untrusting? Progressive politician Pete Buttigieg was talking with a Late Show host this past week and said this about the changes happening in the current government workforce and their structures. The randomness is the problem, he said. I would be the first to say that there are some things in the government that need to be shaken up, that need to be changed. We worked a lot on that when I was there. We took whole departments and took them apart and put them back together. And actually, some people had to be let go as part of that process. But it was a careful process to make sure that we could serve people better. That's not this. Buttigieg described a careful process of change. What he describes is the regular, slower work of government. He's arguing against the radical, transformative chrysalis space of change for our national government, and I am mostly persuaded by that argument. Part of the trouble, I think, is that not everyone consented to get into the goo of our national administration that they are trying to create. For a communal version of such transformation, it needs to be rooted in mutuality. And it doesn't necessarily need to be slow, but it needs to move at the speed of trust so that we're together in the work and less harm is inflicted on the vulnerable among us. Communal transformation is as much of a risk as personal transformation, and it takes shared goals and mutual flourishing and trust. Not all goo is the goo of transformation. Sometimes it's the goo of destruction, with no magical metamorphosis following after. There are countless examples in nature of a hungry organism digesting another organism into goo. That's real. Here's a fascinating thing. Biologists know a little bit about what's going on during the metamorphosis inside the chrysalis. We've actually known for centuries. There is a few things that do not dissolve into goo during the transformation. They talk about imaginal discs that have all the information about the butterfly anatomy ready and waiting inside the caterpillar. During the transformation, when most of the caterpillar's body is digested down to goo, the imaginal discs awaken and begin to form the adult butterfly. In other words, there is a blueprint. There is a map for where the organism is headed. This is a critical element to being able to trust change as it is happening. It makes a big difference to step into uncertainty and chaos if you know that transformation is taking you toward a place you plan to go. As Eric Martinez Resley tells us in our reading this morning, the question is not whether we will get lost in life, but rather how we will move through it in faith. And as you may recall from a sermon I gave a few weeks back, faith is not about trusting when there is zero evidence. Faith is about believing in love, even when love is hidden or masked, and we decide to believe in love anyway. Wesley, in the reading, reminds us that we will always have times in our lives when things fall apart, when relationships sour or at least fade, when work grows dissatisfying, when we are disappointed, when whatever we are doing no longer works, we become disheartened, dispirited, and feel disoriented, he says. We get lost. And then he writes this sentence: the question is not whether we will get lost in life, but rather how we will move through it in faith. Wesley frames this whole reading as the entrance of a labyrinth. I think that is an important framework when we're talking about trusting change. We may need an ending. We may need something simply to end, but we must also start something. We must begin. We must enter the labyrinth. In Alice in Wonderland, Alice had this conversation with the Cheshire Cat. "Would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here?" "That depends a good deal on where you want to get to," said the cat. "Well, I don't much care where," said Alice. "Then it doesn't matter which way you go," said the cat. "Well, so long as I get somewhere," Alice added as an explanation. "Oh, you're sure to do that," said the cat, "if you only walk long enough." This is often paraphrased and then attributed to Lewis Carroll as, "If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there." Most often we are prompted to embark on a change when we recognize a need to end, to leave, to stop something that is no longer working, that is harmful, or simply does not bring joy the way it used to. But to really step into change and trust that process, you need to be headed somewhere. You need to know where you are going. You need those imaginal discs. We're all in the Chrysalis Space, whether we're in it personally or sharing it communally or witnessing someone else that we love who's in it. And when we're there, the greatest question is not if we will get through, but how. To make it through, to emerge as a butterfly, it's not enough to simply dissolve everything to goo. You must have your metaphorical imaginal discs. We must not only leave behind the no longer, we must also reach toward the not yet. Pay attention to what is going on, what is growing, not what is dying. It can be hard to trust change as it is happening. But trusting change is the key to the path through the change. The Chrysalis Space is certainly chaotic and disorienting. We can feel lost, but the way through is like reaching out in the darkness for that pull string to turn on the light. It takes courage and discernment, trusting the process we are in, trusting that we have the tools and the power we need to see our way through, to reach the goal we are after. In a world without end, may it be so.